What do you say if I tell you that there is close to no difference between building Burnice with full anomaly proficiency versus crit, and that the crit build is actually the one ahead? Just maybe, do you also think a 4-piece Inferno Metal is not viable for her? What if an A-rank weapon actually beats out her signature? Okay, the latter is fortunately not the case. Regardless, a crit AP hybrid build can actually be competitive with a full anomaly proficiency build, well, at least in non-disorder teams. So get a cup of tea or coffee and settle in for my most lengthy and probably most in-depth video I have ever done. Let's talk about Burnice White, how she plays, her best weapons, disk drive sets, main and substats, her teams, why she is probably the most universal DPS unit in the game so far in regards to her builds. Let's talk about her Mindscapes and how their value actually changes depending on your team and build, and lastly let's also cover her pros and cons. Welcome, I am Rivenous and this is Burnice's complete in-depth guide. First up, let's talk about what she does and how she plays. Let's start with her core skill. Burnice has her own unique resource called Heat, and using her EX special or ultimate recharges her heat up to a maximum of 100 points or 140 points with her Mindscape 1, with her ultimate restoring 50 points. And unless you have her Mindscape 1 or her signature weapon, you will either need to use her ultimate to cover for her heat costs or equip Energy Regen, and you kinda do not want to equip Energy Regen if you can avoid it. Which means Burnice will take away the ultimate from whoever is your other carry, at least until the changes to ultimates come around. This is important to keep in mind when looking at her teams later. So first let's do a quick excursion to her basics, EX special and ultimate before we can continue with her core skill. Burnice also features a 5-part basic attack string, but it is usually not worth using, which means we will skip this part. However, holding her basic attack while we have at least 20 heat stored will consume 20 heat for her to spin around and finish the move with a, well, finishing move. You can also finish the move early, which will instantly cast the finishing move, and that can actually be pretty useful depending on the situation because iframes exist. A little bit more on that later. Using her EX special right after the finishing move or after her assist follow-up will then cast the enhanced version of her EX special called Double Shot. We can also activate this by retapping her EX special while using her EX special, and Double Shot is also approximately double as strong as the regular EX special, so we want to focus on this. Using her EX special will also generate 1.4 heat for every energy spent. This means a fully charged EX special Double Shot costs you 60 energy and will hence restore 84 heat. As mentioned previously, her ultimate restores 50 heat, deals a heat load of damage and triggers a quick assist, and when said quick assist is activated, she will continue spraying from the heavens for just a bit longer. Also, in regards to both her Double Shot EX special and also her ultimate, both have pretty good MVs, with her EX special having the highest special multiplier in the game, and this will become relevant later on. Now that we understand how her EX special, basic and ultimate work and what they look like, let's continue with her core skill. If above 50 heat, Burnice will enter the Nitro Fuel cocktail state. Who the fuck is responsible for naming this? And during the state, dealing any damage with her charged basic attack, EX special, chain or ultimate will apply a debuff on enemies hit called Scorch. Scorch lasts basically infinitely, however, when any team member not called Burnice hits an enemy affected by Scorch, Burnice will trigger Afterburn at the expense of 8 heat. Afterburn deals fire damage, accumulates fire anomaly and can trigger once every 1.5 seconds. Let's finish up her kit. Her chain attack has an insane anomaly application, her dodge will rarely be used, and her assist follow-up allows you to cast Double Shot as mentioned previously. In regards to her additional ability, if paired with another agent of the same faction or another anomaly agent, she will not only gain 65% fire anomaly build up, but also her Afterburn will deal 1% more damage for every 10 anomaly proficiencies she has, up to a total of 30%, or in other words, 300 anomaly proficiency. This will be a bit relevant later on as well. And lastly, the duration of burn is also extended by 3 seconds. That is about as much as I want to talk about her kit, at least in regards to how it works outside of Afterburn. Instead, I do want to talk a bit more on how Afterburn works, because the way of how it works and how anomalies work is important to understand in order to build her correctly. And depending on your team, your build might change. So let's talk about Afterburn just a bit more. Afterburn scales of your attack and not anomaly proficiency, well outside the 30% damage bonus, and it can also in fact critically strike. Actually, it behaves like any assist attack, which means it takes all your damage bonuses for assists and pain ratio into account. It will also count as a hit from Burnice, which means it re-triggers and resets the duration of Inferno Metal's 4P set effect while the enemy is burned. Both of these are important when looking at Burnice builds. Each tick of Afterburn will also apply 60 fire anomalies scaled by your anomaly build-up and anomaly mastery. With about 11 ticks per rotation, without any additional anomaly mastery, that will total to about 1520 anomaly, which is about half of what we need to trigger burn. Using anomaly mastery in slot 6 will raise this to 2460, which is still not enough to trigger a burn by itself. In fact, still a large part of her anomaly application comes from her other skills, namely EX Special, Ultimate, Chain Attack and Follow-Up, which means even if built with Anomaly Mastery, we will still need to swap her in regularly to trigger burn. There is a breakpoint of 1 additional burn every 3 rotations if running Anomaly Mastery, but the damage loss by running AM over attack percent is not actually worth it, even in disorder teams. All of this makes Anomaly Mastery a suboptimal choice for Burnice, except for a very special niche within a Grace disorder team. Before we continue, by now you have hopefully figured out that Burnice is supposed to be played off-field. She will apply a large amount of fire anomaly within a short time, then continue dealing fire anomaly and fire damage from off-field. Knowing that, let's cover her combos. She has 3 noteworthy main combos. When starting combat, you will want to start off with the first combo. Basic attack 1 into charged attack into EX special double shot, then switch her out. The basic 1 before her charge attack cannot be avoided and will happen automatically if you hold her basic attack. Continuing during combat, her best combo is defensive assist into assist follow-up into EX special double shot. For her most time efficient combo, if in need, tap EX special into holding EX special double shot. And while this is just slightly more expensive on energy than the other combos, it is also the fastest and will provide you with the most iframes. Those are all of the notable main combos you will need to know. So let's talk about Disorder. Before we continue with this part, I want to make something very clear. Disorder, and more so a full anomaly proficiency build, is her preferred way of playing her, and while a crit build is possible, the latter is mostly applicable in non-disorder, and by that I mean basically mono fire teams. And it will only outperform her AP counterpart in these teams, and not by that much. Due to this, I assumed a 80% contribution to burn from Burnice. Next, we have to keep in mind that Disorder removes the burn aura if the base for said Disorder is Burn, and Jane as well as Grace both apply Assault and Shock faster than Burnice applies Burn, since Burnice is heavily limited by her energy and heat costs. However, Grace allows for slightly more field time than Jane does, which makes Burnice able to get onto the field for a quick basic attack combo, which will just be enough to make Anomaly Mastery worth it over attack percent. Knowing all of this, let's head into some calcs. This sheet is probably the biggest I have done yet, with over 80 pages and counting. So let's dive into the 2 playstyles for Burnice. Disorder, which utilizes a full anomaly proficiency build as well as a crit AP hybrid build. Again, yes, that is a thing. Outside of Disorder teams, a crit playstyle can actually come out ahead by about 10%. However, for full transparency, yet again, it is also about 12.5% behind a full AP playstyle when played in Disorder. Overall, this makes her anomaly proficiency playstyle more generally applicable. But playing her as a crit AP hybrid is an option, especially if you have extremely good Inferno Metal pieces for her in a mono fire team. Or if you are like Gyro10 and wrote this piece. Let Gyro know in the comments what a god roll piece this is. Also yes, I asked for permission. Looking at her notable damage distributions, for Disorder about 80% of her total damage dealt are done by Anomaly and Disorder. For an AP crit build, that is only about 14%. Regardless of her playstyle, her ultimate and EX special are a significant part of her total damage, with the assist damage shown here being mostly her afterburn. This leaves her final skill priority at core skill into ultimate and special into assist and basics into dodge. Which is also a good time to talk about her investment cost. Regardless of her team and playstyle, but still much more important for a crit-based approach, a large part of her damage still comes from her pretty insane multipliers. This also means compared to other anomaly-based units, we are looking at a pretty expensive investment. Not only do we want to max out her core skill, but also her ultimate and EX special, as well as having steep investment into her disc drives, regardless if we are looking for full EP or the crit values. Let's finally also get to her builds, and we will start with her weapons. If played in an anomaly team, her signature is in fact her best unslot, but not by that much. In fact, an R5 Electro Lip Gloss from the Battle Pass is only about 6% worse, with her next best options being an R5 Rainforest Gourmet, an R5 Weeping Gemini, or even Fusion Compiler. In regards to Fusion Compiler, I have assumed one stack, and even though you can somewhat animation cancel her specials to stack it somewhat fast, her wanting to be off field for usually longer than 8 seconds makes it pretty difficult, or at the very least impractical, to maintain the stacks. When looking at her crit playstyle, we see a slightly different picture, however. Her signature is still her best in slot, but this time by an actual wide margin. Her next best choice is the R5 Electro Lip Gloss, already 10% worse than her signature, followed by Fusion Compiler and an R5 Weeping Gemini. An R5 Rainforest Gourmet is now already about 18% worse than her signature. Here are both weapon calculations side by side for both playstyles, pause if you need to. This is also probably a good point to talk about today's sponsor. Actually, just kidding, let's talk about her sets instead. However, I would still much appreciate a like on the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. Let's continue with her sets. Regardless of her playstyle, all of her set choices, and especially the 2-piece options, are often very close to each other. For a Disorder build, we are looking at a 4-piece Chaos Jazz with a 2-piece Inferno Metal as her best unslot options. However, as you can see, the differences are so small that depending on your substats, any of the other 2-piece options will work just as well. Actually, as teased earlier, if you do not have her Mindscape 1 or her signature weapon, running a 2-piece Swing Jazz can actually significantly help you out with energy to keep generating the necessary heat. We can see a similar and just as much forgiving result for the Crit AP Hybrid build. While a 4-piece Inferno with a 2-piece Woodpecker is her best in slot in theory, depending on your substats, yet again, all other options will serve well. As already mentioned earlier, Inferno is actually such a good choice for this playstyle because her Afterburn will reset the duration of Inferno's crit rate while the enemy is burned, essentially granting it 21 seconds of uptime, or in applicable terms forever. This is however not the case in Disorder teams, since as mentioned earlier, Disorder will remove the burn aura if burn is the base and used for said Disorder. This makes Inferno Metal and hence crit build an inherently worse choice for Disorder teams, and unless you want to unalive your Shio defense attempts, not necessarily something I would recommend. Which also means this build is specifically the best choice in a mono fire team, however it again depends on your substats as well. Again, any of the other 2-piece options are great, so hey Gyro, if you feel like using a crit Burnice in a mono fire team, that freedom piece right there is a god roll. Now let's get to the interesting parts. Her main stats, because they will change depending on your weapon choice. With her signature, looking at the Disorder playstyle, Anomaly proficiency in slot 4, fire damage bonus in slot 5 and attack percent in slot 6 are her best options. Unless you play her in the previously mentioned Grace team, in which case Anomaly Mastery comes out ahead for slot 6. The value for Anomaly Mastery here is also normalized, which means the actual damage difference is higher than I have it here in my sheet. I just want to emphasize that. That aside, pen ratio comes very close to fire damage percent in slot 5, and spoilers can even come out ahead with her Mindscape 2 or when using Fusion Compiler. However, looking at another weapon option, namely the more free-to-play friendly Weeping Gemini, any other combo not being fire damage and pen ratio in slot 5 will come out ahead, with Anomaly Mastery in slot 6 skyrocketing to the top, especially for Weeping Gemini, since we can now assume an additional stack. A similar result for attack percent in slot 5 can be seen for all weapon choices who grant more Anomaly proficiency than her signature does due to oversaturation. I also want to quickly mention a 4-piece Freedom Blues because I know the question will come up in the comments. Actually, leave me a comment if you were about to comment on this. Anyway, a 4-piece Freedom Blues is better held by a fire-type teammate of hers, for example Lucy, Colada or Ben. However, using instead a 4-piece Swing Jazz on them is usually better, with the exception of Sad Rise team, where you can run Freedom Blues on Colada or Lucy instead and use attack percent in slot 6 for Burnice. For a crit-based playstyle, her main stats do not change as much. Crit damage in slot 4, fire damage in slot 5 and attack percent in the last slot are her best options. However, yet again, nearly all other combinations are within a 5% difference range regardless of her weapon choice. So that covers her builds. Or does it? Well, technically not, but doing these cults for literally every possible single team is not something I want to do honestly. I already spent 4 days on these sheets for Burnice now. The main takeaway, however, is the same. The difference between her main stats and disk drives is so small that regardless of the team, you can usually choose whatever has the better substats. And that brings us to her substat priority and breakpoints. Starting with the first, for Disorder and AP teams, we are mainly looking for, well, Anomaly Proficiency first and foremost, with approximately 420 AP being the breakpoint, at which you should try to focus more on attack percent. However, due to her kit, as we established earlier, even crit values are not wasted and flat attack and also flat pen are not useless as well. However, this does look differently for her crit AP hybrid playstyle. Because we still want to maximize her core skill passive as much as possible, we are still looking for anomaly proficiency, but also crit values. The breakpoint I personally found was about 220 to 250 anomaly proficiency out of combat. Then we are looking at about 60 to 70% crit rate and 150% crit damage for an endgame build. This is actually not that easy to achieve, and your priority should be to hit at least 200 anomaly proficiency, 50% crit rate and 100% crit damage, again out of combat. A really good piece would look something like this. This leaves her final subset priority at anomaly proficiency until breakpoint, then crit rate and crit damage into attack percent, into flat pen and flat attack. If you're interested in my results, a screenshot of all my results can be found over in my Discord, a link is in the description. Now we can finally talk about her Mindscapes. And surprise, actually no surprise, because I spoiled it earlier, her Mindscapes values change quite a bit depending on your playstyle. Her Mindscape 1 increases the maximum heat to 140, increases the afterburn damage multiplier by 100%, as well as its anomaly build up by 25%. This now also makes Anomaly Mastery not only viable, but actually her best in slot option for slot 6 main stats in any Disorder team, as Afterburn itself can now easily proc more than one burn. Her Mindscape 2 basically grants all allies stacking pen ratio up to 20%, and this catapults pen ratio as a main stat to her best in slot option, at least for Disorder. As per usual, Mindscapes 3 and 5 don't matter, they are however a little bit better for crit AP hybrid playstyles. Her Mindscape 4 grants her EX special and any assist attack 30% crit rate and extends the maximum duration of her EX special by 1 second. And as we already know, her Afterburn is considered assist damage. Unfortunately, this Mindscape does not matter too much for a Disorder Burnice. Her Mindscape 6 though does. In fact, that is a lot of text for saying you now do a lot more damage. For Disorder Burnice, the relevant part here is the Fire Rest Shred, which not only applies to all the important parts of her kit, but also any burn during her EX special. This is a pretty good Mindscape for Disorder Burnice. For Crit Burnice, this looks slightly different. While her Mindscape 6 becomes close to irrelevant in comparison to Disorder Burnice, she massively profits from her Mindscape 1 and especially 4. Mindscape 4 basically allows you to build 30% crit rate less and shift your build much more towards crit damage. Overall, crit AP hybrid Burnice profits just slightly more from her Mindscapes, with her Mindscape 4 being a good stopping point when looking at crit and Mindscape 2 when looking at Disorder Burnice. Next up are her teams. There are many and I can literally not list them all. But, well, here are some. Most notably, I want to talk about Caesar and Lucy. Generally speaking, especially for Disorder, Lucy is the better choice. Reason here being that Lucy takes not only slightly less field time, but her 100 combat attack and crit damage are unconditional and will always apply to Burnice. This is not the case for Caesar, as her attack buff is only granted to the active field unit, And while pre-Mindscape 1 still a large part of her anomaly is applied on field, you will miss out on some damage. Her Mindscape 1 and beyond, especially when playing with Anomaly Mastery in slot 6, well, this gets worse, as now a large part of the anomaly is applied off-field. However, Caesar is still a fine choice, albeit not as good as Lucy, at least in my opinion. In addition, Burnice EX Special will also have hail down a truckload of boars if you have M6 Lucy. Just to reiterate, for Grace, Anomaly Mastery in slot 6 can be better due to her allowing for more field time. You can also play Burnice with Seth, which simply makes her disorder stronger. A possible current team would be Burnice with Corrin and Caesar. Ben can also take the slot of Lucy or Kolidar in a Soldier 11 Burnice Mono Fire team. If played with Rena, Pen Ratio becomes her best choice for slot 5, and for a Burnice Grace Lucy team, Grace does not actually gain her additional ability, so keep that in mind. Overall, her disorder teams are stronger than her non-disorder teams, but not everyone enjoys disorder, has the necessary units for these teams or the disk drives, which is why I provided the Crit AP hybrid build as a possible option, which especially in mono fire teams can beat out a full AP build. And with that, we are now slowly closing towards the end of the video. Lastly, we still have her pros and cons. And due to popular request, her Bangboos. Rocket Boo or even Cryboo are good choices for dual fire teams. Her faction Bangboo Red Mokos is great for Caledon based teams, with Officer Kui being a great choice if played with Drain and Seth. Bang Volver is another great choice if played with Caesar and Nekomata or Corrin. For her pros and cons, let's start with her pros. She has incredible build diversity. Her main stats and 2-piece disk drives are all very close to each other, and even if played with a 4-piece Inferno Metal and a full crit build, you are likely only missing out on about 12% damage compared to a full AP build. This makes her incredibly easy to build, and she makes good use of nearly all offensive stats. Her teams are endless. She has so many teams, it is actually pretty incredible, and one of her best teammates, namely Lucy, is currently obtainable for free from the event. Her Mindscapes are not only great quality of life, but also bring significant damage increases. She is incredibly easy to play, and her damage is honestly beyond all charts. And lastly, there are two cons I have. First up, her weapon is actually pretty good, even more so for a crit build, and all the free-to-play options. I mean, they are fine, and you can probably more see this like a neutral point, but well, her weapon is pretty good. Well, the other point being, her investment is not as cheap as many other anomaly units, at least in theory. You can simply reuse some disk drives, which makes her a lot easier to build. Overall, I honestly wish Hoyu would have paid me to sell you Burnice like this, but unfortunately I do not get paid for saying she is really good. Regardless, Burnice is a fantastic unit to add to your roster. And with that said, thank you so much for watching, don't forget to leave a like and a comment and subscribe, and enjoy the showcase. Peace!